I personally, from my own story, when, going to a grammar school and then trying to look at an alternative route into employment, going back home and then trying to translate that to my parents in some form that they understood, just didn't get through to them. We also had this negativity of, you'll reach a glass ceiling in your career if you're not a graduate. And we all know that's nonsense now. But at a time when I was at school, and even nowadays, that still seems to be the thing. When you're speaking to parents and you're talking about apprenticeships, they tend to see them as lesser to going to university. So we launched the awards, and the whole purpose of that was to create role models. And I'm proud to say we've got 6 fantastic role models here. And what I'm going to do is, has anyone got any questions first? Has anyone got a burning question that they want to ask right now? Ami?
When you sort of went through the apprenticeship process, did you face any barriers? So not just thinking about family pressures or, kind of the barriers you might have faced from your family and friends maybe, but through the process, were there any barriers that you kind of identified and thought this could be done differently, or that you've streamlined in the companies that you work in now?
Anushka, you mentioned this, didn't you, that actually the application process is quite long and quite difficult. And if you're asking a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old who's never done anything like this in their life to go online and fill out a massive form and answer all these different questions, is that the right thing? Especially when you've got people from disadvantaged backgrounds who necessarily don't have that support. So I'm going to let Anushka speak first about your experience, and then we'll build on it from there.
So I personally feel that, when I was applying to apprenticeships, it was definitely a more strenuous process than opposed to university. And my question kind of says why is the process harder to get into an apprenticeship than university when they provide the same set of skills? Obviously, apprenticeships, you get work experience, but you know what I mean. And I personally didn't struggle with the questions because I talk a lot, but anyways, not everyone's like me. So I feel that, I feel that a lot of people that I know, like friends of mine who they're not, they're quite shy at that age, or they just didn't know what to say because they've never done an interview, never worked a day in their life because, we were very young. So they must have faced a lot of difficulties in, sitting there for hours just filling out this form on a screen. And I think that can be quite draining for anyone. I think even job applications are shorter for adults. So why were they so long for kids is kind of my question. But obviously not all are the same. I understand there's differences and discrepancies between lots of different firms. But yeah, I think mine generally was okay, but I know that a lot of my friends and maybe even apprentices in this room probably had that question in their mind. And it was more so that, if you don't get them engaged from day one, will you ever get them engaged? And, that's sort of the question that needs to be raised when employers look at their application process. And I think as soon as that stage was over and I passed the form bit, everything after then I loved for my personality type. But I think you need to see how apprenticeships can provide all different kinds of processes for every apprentice to succeed or student in their application. And yes, there needs to be some kind of difficulty to highlight who you want to employ and who you don't. I completely understand, but making a young person at that age sit there and write hours and hours of questions and things that they may not even know the answers to yet because they're only 16 or 18 years old. So, yeah.
I think one of the issues we're looking at here is, yes, you want to get the information. You want to try and select the best talent out there for that apprenticeship. But then you've also got to realise, not everyone is at the same footing when they're coming into this. And particularly, as I said, when you're looking at people from multicultural backgrounds, you've got to think about their family background. Are their parents, is their first language English? Do they work in professional environments? Now, I always give this analogy. You've got a white middle-class child who is an only child, lives in a semi-detached property in a nice area, in a nice borough of a nice city in the UK. And then you've got someone from an Asian background or a black background who's grown up in an inner city area of a major city. Mother may be working as a nurse, father works as a labourer in a factory. What advantage is there for that individual? You know, so you've got one person whose parents probably a professional, so straight away he's at an advantage there. He knows that he can rely on his parents to come and help him with that application process. He's got the resources. He's probably got his own bedroom with a computer and, you know, internet. And yeah, I'm going to say internet because some people we saw over the pandemic didn't even have access to the internet. You know, there were kids who were doing their homework on a mobile phone, sharing it with their, you know, other 3 or 4 siblings living in that 2-bedroom terraced house, you know. So those are the kind of things that we need to be thinking about, you know, what are we doing different and how do we tackle those issues? So, you know, Anushka's talked about it's hard enough for a young person as it is, but actually when we look at the cultural barriers, these are the kind of stigmas and issues we need to be thinking about. So, go on.
I just have a question. So I'm going through this at the moment with my 15-year-old, and she's been told she's just got all 9s in her mocks. She's been told she's far too clever for an apprenticeship. So I just wanted to ask, and this is from the head teacher. Luckily, she said you haven't met my mum. But like from your experience at school, were you ever signposted to apprenticeships? I know like you get dedicated time for UCAS, but did you get any support in kind of understanding what apprenticeships are? Yes, of course.
It's interesting you come on to that point, Lucy, because what I was going to say was what Anushka's talking about is that lengthy application process. Do the school put the same resources that they put into making you do your personal statement, your UCAS application and everything else? Would they give you that same support to then do that application?
And I had the same thing, as your daughter, where I got all 9s predicted when I was like 15, 16, and then did really well, did 4 A-levels, and that's exactly what my school and my sixth form said to me, that you shouldn't do an apprenticeship because like you're way too smart for that. And then they used to say to people who were, you know, maybe not as academically involved that, you know, you're too dumb to do an apprenticeship. So what? Like, so where do you have to be to do an apprenticeship? Like, I don't understand. And that's exactly what, you know, I'm trying to, I guess, encourage through the work that I do across, you know, social media, is like try to get young people like your daughter to understand that sometimes they don't know what they're talking about because they haven't experienced it themselves. And maybe this is an issue that teachers don't get training in like apprenticeships, you know, further enough. My mum's a teacher and she's head of physics, and they don't have that at their school, where, you know, apprenticeships are like highly promoted or seen as a good thing. People think that it's either a Russell Group uni or nothing. And, you know, it's the same sort of approach that they have for gap years, where a lot of teachers also they don't promote that and they think that it's a bad option. So it seems like in schools, even till now, I left school, 3 and something half years ago, and I'm still getting the same feedback from people like yourselves, where you know, kids aren't getting the right information. So it's kind of seeing, you know, what is the government or employers or even teachers and schools doing about that to get people to come in, like apprenticeship talks, which I know some organisations do, and I've done a couple of them myself. And, you know, I get the same questions exactly like your poor daughter who has to go through something like that, which is just not fair. So insulting. Yeah.
You need to be academic because you'll be working full time and doing a qualification.
It's double the work. Like, I don't understand why that's such a problem to see, but
You wanted to say something?
Yeah, sorry. It's really interesting you brought that up, because I remember it's exact same thing happened to myself when I was in sixth form. So they brought in somebody in to talk about degree apprenticeships, and I asked her, "What's your background?" She said, "I went to uni." I said, why are you talking about degree apprenticeships? What's your experience? She I kid you not, she told me I read about it online and they asked me to come in. I right there and then I thought, and after that talk, I was speaking to my friends, we were all really inclined not to do degree apprenticeships. And I think the biggest challenge is that this isn't a challenge, this is actually a benefit, that I don't know, depending on what program you decide to take, you actually have lower entry requirements. But then again, it's the company, I think we'll all agree here, hiring you as an individual, not as a student. You know, top grades, yes, they do matter, but, you know, they're looking at you as a holistic person. They're trying to find someone that they can shape, mold into being future leaders of the company. And I think the whole idea that because it's lower grade requirements, you're not smart enough, you're too smart to do an apprenticeship. You know, I've had friends who have gone to Russell Group universities. They've just come out of university with their 3 years and are now actually struggling to find work, because I think we'll all agree here that employers want experience. But how can you get that experience necessary when you've just done 3 years of theory? You know, you need to be able to practically apply it. So I think schools just need to have people, you know, really and truly, apprentices like us going in, talking about our experiences so that they can see the benefit for themselves. And, you know, some people may decide that it's not for them, that's fine. But until they have that exposure, you know, I really hate the idea that you're too smart or you're not smart enough. I think it's just what's the word? Misleading. Thank you.
Sunny's got something to say, so should we head over to Sunny?
Thank you.
So EY is one of the big four accounting firms, as you may know. I think their entrance grades for A-levels is BBC for apprenticeships. So it might sound relatively easy, but I'm also a numbers guy. 40,000 applicants applied for EY in the year that I applied. 1,000 of those people got accepted across the country. Over 800 of those were graduates from universities like Oxford, Cambridge, LSE, you know, big London unis. So that leaves about 200 apprentices nationally that got accepted. The interview process is 6 stages, testing your English comprehension, maths tests, 1 interview from a private interviewer company, 1 interview from a manager, and also a group task that you have to do face-to-face. And then the last stage, if you get that far, is a partner interview. Now, the partners at EY charge upwards of £2,000 to £3,000 per hour. So if you get through to the 6th stage, the company's already spent about £3,000 or more in that interview process. So the entrance requirements are BBC, but, you know, like my fellow apprentices have said, the real requirements are much harder and an incredibly small percentage. And like Kasim said before, if you've spent so much time on just investing in students doing personal statements and UCAS, and most of those don't have interview stages, think about how much time should go into applying for one of these apprenticeships. And the total hours that I spent at school applying for that was nil. I actually took a gap year, took out a lot of time to research it and apply for it. My grades weren't as good as those, but I took 5 A-levels and 2 B-Techs in the 2 years that I was doing A-levels. Again, my grades weren't as good as those, but I went on the numbers, I hope. But I also did work experience, internships in FTSE 100 companies, and a lot of the apprentices that certainly got in my year, about 6 in my department, they got mostly A-stars, had internships across big companies, or just had something really interesting about them. Some of them rejected Cambridge or Oxford. Some of them rejected companies like Goldman Sachs. So, you know, tell them those facts, tell them those numbers, and I'm sure they'll have a different opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I was gonna just add a point about the school support. So in addition to what my fellow apprentice said, in my school there was actually no support, no mention of apprenticeships at all. So I was lucky enough to have a family friend who introduced me to them. But if it was just me like going through normal school, I would have had no idea about apprenticeships. You know, we've got things like National Apprenticeship Week where, you know, sometimes they bring people in, but when I was at school we didn't have anyone come in or anything along those lines. We had loads of support for our personal statements and university applications. And, you know, just to give an example as to the extent of how we really didn't know much about apprenticeships, when I was telling, you know, my friends that I was applying to companies like British Airways and TfL, just some apprenticeships that I'd found, like they'd make jokes about whether I was trying to become a bus driver or a pilot, because they really didn't know what working for TfL meant. You know, you're just at school at the time, and that's what you associate it with. So I think seeing now more that that's increasing, and schools are opening up the door more about apprenticeships, but I think we're still not quite there yet.
Really important point there then about employer brand. You know, when we're talking to employers, what does your employer brand say about you? You know, we see Coca-Cola and you think, right, am I going to go and make Coke now? You know, but we obviously realise that there's so many different apprenticeship opportunities within Coca-Cola. Severn Trent, another one, you know, you've got degree apprenticeships, you've got accountancy apprenticeship, business admin apprenticeships. So although when I'm out there, I'm talking to employers and they're like, yeah, everyone knows what we do. They don't. The young people do not know. They only know what they associate their brain with your brand. Now, you know, that's not necessarily them associating their brain with a job opportunity or a career opportunity within your organization. So it's very important that you're looking at, yeah, that's your consumer brand, that's the brand that's out there, but what's your employer brand saying to young people? What are you selling to these young people in terms of opportunities? So, Anita.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of build on the points from Lucy and Amy and across the apprentices here on the panel. So I'm an upskill apprentice, but this story is more around the fact that you said there needs to be more advice given by people who understand what apprenticeships are. So I work in apprenticeships and I am an apprentice, and I do advise schools on what apprenticeships are. But my best friend, for example, her daughter had finished her A-levels and was thinking about doing accountancy at university. And I said, before you do that, please come and have lunch with me. Let me talk to you about the opportunity that there is out there to get into accountancy through an apprenticeship. I told her I worked at Grant Thornton at the time. I told her to have a look at Grant Thornton, KPMG, EY, have a look at the opportunities. And she was blown away. She couldn't believe that she'd never heard of this before. She didn't realise the support network and the key fact that you can become a fully qualified accountant in 5 years as opposed to 7. She would be starting on and I'm sure, I mean, she tells everyone, so she started on 24k at 18 years old, and it is absolutely, you know, she's got friends now who are doing accountancy degrees, and she now has a mentor who is head of Africa for Grant Thornton. She, you know, is from an underprivileged background, underrepresented, and if it hadn't have been for the conversation that I'd had with her, just to say stop and have a look at the other opportunities that were out there, she never would have had a look in. She never would have known, and she could have been at university right now thinking about, okay, well, how am I going to get, you know, an actual job? So I think to a point that we were talking about earlier, it goes back a step to actually how do we involve parents in that conversation and your wider network and your community to help empower people to take those decisions. Yeah.
So I think it's really important what you're saying there. And, you know, if I reflect back on my own story, when I went to a grammar school, I got invited by KPMG to go and listen to one of their day things where you go and, you know, it's a bit of a taster session on what an apprenticeship is and what it's like working at KPMG. And I thought, fantastic, right? Go home, right? This is what I want to do, Mum and Dad. Get out of here. You're going to university. And that's because they didn't know what it was and they weren't familiar with it. And we're still, I think it's changing because, you know, as we're getting older, you know, parents are more exposed to different things. They're seeing different things. They're seeing people come out of university. I mean, we went rogue in Birmingham one year to record some content for what was then the Asian Apprenticeship Awards. And we interviewed a taxi driver. And he said, you know what, I'm in favour of apprenticeships because I'm now driving a taxi with other people who are graduates who can't get jobs, and they're having to, you know, in his own words, was resort to driving cabs because they can't get the jobs in the degrees that they've got. And then there was another lady who I met, and she was like, yeah, I love apprenticeships, but my daughter wants to be a lawyer. Well, did you know that she could be a lawyer through an apprenticeship? So again, it is about getting that message out there. And, you know, we keep talking about schools. Teachers have only ever taught. They've only ever been in education. And that is something that's not going to change for a very, very long time. You know, when we ran the Festival of Apprenticeships, we had teachers that attended the event and sat on a bench. They sat on a bench instead of engaging with the employers to find out what apprenticeship opportunities were available. I know you've been waiting a long time.
I think you almost preempted one of my first questions anyway, was something you covered off, but I would like to, I think, also on that point, in a little bit of defence of teachers as well, because I don't think inherently teachers get into teaching because they want to pass on their knowledge, experience, and their passion for teaching young people and enabling and empowering young people. They're constrained by the system. Yeah. And often teachers are spinning that many plates. They would love to be armed with all this information around apprenticeships and things like that, but often they just simply don't have the capacity. You know, and a careers lead in school will often also be safeguarding lead, Senko lead, on the senior leadership team. They just have that much on their plates. I think, yeah, we almost sometimes just have to bear that in mind for teachers. But I think back to your original point as well, and I'm keenly aware that I'm here talking about a tech platform, but we're also talking about equity of access. So is there anything during your journey, particularly during maybe your earlier years, that you think us collectively as employers, solutions as part of that whole early talent pipeline, we could maybe do to facilitate access to, whether that's directly to apprenticeships or knowledge, awareness or insights around that, whether that's clearly technology based on my side or not?
I think effectively what we're asking now from the panel is, what would you like? You know, you've got employers, learning providers, people in tech, education. What do you want these guys to do to make it better?
I think that firstly, it's, you know, obviously I agree that it's not the teacher's fault because they have a system behind them and it's very difficult to engage. However, I think that if employers and, you know, organisations like yourselves go out there and reach out to these schools like you're doing already, but there's not many people like you, which is the problem, I think, in the UK, that, you know, more companies and more, you know, organisations need to care about the future generation, because we are the people who will lead the future. And I think, like, the fact that, you know, we're not encouraged and pushed to explore all of our options. It's not specifically just promoting apprenticeships. It's giving students access to every single option they have so that they can make that decision. Okay, I want to do an apprenticeship. Okay, I still want to go to uni. Okay, I want to take a gap year. They need to have all the options, which is what I did at school. I researched it myself because I was lucky enough to, you know, pick up on that during COVID, and I just gave myself a full plate of options. But none of my friends did that because they didn't have access to that information, just like me. And
two organisations I'm going to recommend, and I'd be grateful for your views. Also aware that one of them is a patron partner, I think. But UCAS, I'm not going to uni. I'm going to argue in my legal sector that that's the first step at the very highest level, awareness raising. Then you do the deep dive into schools. I'd be grateful for your views.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I actually work with both of them. So, UCAS actually are the first organisation that I ever reached out to in my social media freelance journey on this kind of adventure to encourage young people to explore their options. And actually, UCAS, I've been to their office plenty of times. I went the other week. All their employees are very interested and care about apprenticeships. The problem that they have, because the other day we did a live filming for apprenticeships, and, you know, we figured out what the questions were from young people looking into UCAS, what's better about apprenticeships, what's better about uni, and we had a few of us on the panel taking all these different pathways. And the problem is that they find, from employees I've spoke to myself, that parents have a really big influence on their kids, and they force their kids primarily, not all parents obviously, but a lot of parents, force their kids into one thing, or a lot of teachers, because of maybe they, there are rumours out there that teachers get some sort of bonus for sending a certain amount of kids to X amount of universities or whatever name there are. And if those rumours are correct, then we know that, that is where the focus is. And, we can start by looking at the fact that I agree with you. At UCAS, the personal statement has just been announced to be dropped by 2024. And if you didn't know that, they're replacing it with 6 different questions now. And this is very similar to like what apprenticeships, do in their application stage. Obviously, apprenticeships have a lot more questions, and as Sunny explained, very long process because it's a very, wide group of people that apply. So with UCAS removing that personal statement, it goes to show that they do understand that apprenticeships are actually a valuable.
Well, they pledged to be route neutral by 2025, haven't they?
Yeah.
When you look for a degree, you get the degree apprenticeship and the traditional.
So that's exactly what I was going to say.
Can I add just one thing to that? It's just what you said, what we can do as employers, and I'll make this very quick. I think that one of the biggest issues that none of us have mentioned so far today, but is the social life as an apprentice. I feel like when you're trying to approach 18-year-olds with the prospect of having full-time work and studying for your degree, we can't ignore the fact that people want to enjoy their lives. They can't just be like, I'm an apprentice. I know that I'm not stuck down on my books 24/7. I know that I have some form of a social life. I feel like that's really important to portray as employers, that it's not just this big corporate world where we come into the office in suits and ties, we're here 24/7, all for no fun and all whatever, all work, no fun. But I feel like that is such a big impact that you just really display.
So true.
You have a social life with other apprentices. One thing GSK does really nicely is we do every year weekly development events. So you meet the first year cohort in completely different areas of the company, and you move up. So like you do it every year with them, week-long events, whether it's in the Lake District, Peak District, obviously budget and stuff you have to formulate. But I think it's just really important that social network is displayed when you're advertising it, and you're just trying to attract new talent.
And that was the most commonly asked question on that UCAS podcast that I did. Yeah. I think over 80% of the viewers were like, do you get a social life? Do you get a social life? Just in different ways. Yeah. So,
and you have money to fund that social life.
Well, there you go. You got money to fund the social life. And then we've also, obviously, the new and up-and-coming Association of Apprentices, which is trying to bridge that gap for those employers that can't necessarily implement it themselves. So for those on the smaller apprenticeships, with smaller companies that can get involved in the association, who will put on those events, those social events, which we were at when was it, Christmas? Yeah. Before Christmas, which was fantastic because you had over 100 apprentices from all different companies meeting each other, networking. So, get involved. If you can't provide for your own apprentices yourselves, get involved in something like the AOA, where you can provide that social element. And Amy was reminding me about the social events we used to do when we were at university, and how can we bring that into apprenticeships? And I think that's an interesting point there.
Yeah, sorry, Cassim, just a question really, because I'm conscious of the fact that we haven't heard from Ariba.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to come on to next, actually, because Ariba's from a smaller organisation in the grand scheme of things, and actually, everyone else has talked about working for a large organisation. What's it like working for a smaller organisation? And actually, that's where a bulk of the apprenticeships are. They're not actually with the corporates, they're with the SMEs, they're with the smaller organisations. So what do you think we can do to get more people into those apprenticeships?
My situation was different because I came from, my mum and my stepdad were very I'd like to say Pakistani. They're very Pakistani. So it was a case of, obviously you went to school and they expected you to go to university, obviously do a degree. So it's like they main. Thank you. I thought I'd allowed gob anyway, but I think the thing with them is they are cultural in a sense, but the things that matter to them most is what our relatives gonna say. It's like, oh, my kid's gone to university and got a degree. If they turned around and said my kid's doing an apprenticeship, they'd be like in a sense. But my situation sort of changed when I was 16. I'd done 2 months of sixth form, but then due to some issues and problems, I ended up in care. So my priority was, I wasn't academically like inclined. Like I hated, like I couldn't just sit studying from a textbook because my mind just like wandered off. And there are many kids like that have to be doing like physical activities as such. So I remember at school we had a talk about apprenticeships, and the one thing I remember is they are very difficult to get into. And it was a woman from, I think she was from DHL, talking about apprenticeships, and she was like, we've got a lot of people applying, but it's very difficult to get into it. But I remember I was just, because my situation changed, my main priority was to be financially independent because I had nothing and I had like no one in a sense. So I remember I was on the government website and I was just looking at apprenticeships and I applied for 5 random ones. I did read the job description, but I applied for 5 random ones, but the one that I'm doing now was the one that stood out to me the most. And I remember I don't think the forms were that long for me, but I remember going in for my interview and it's like I was scared and I was like, they're gonna ask me like formal questions like what's your experience, what's this, but my company knew that I was 16, so we had a sort of informal conversation where like I could just show myself in a sense, and just be myself. And then I think like 4 days later they was like, okay, come in, you've got the job. And since then it's a case of like from when I had nothing and I entered into an apprenticeship, one that I wanted, I got support from the company. It wasn't just a 9-to-5 job, me studying. I think it was a customer service practitioner as well. That company did help me, obviously, with home life or whatever situation it was. They made sure that I didn't hold back because of that, and they gave me the support that I needed. But like I said, it's like I didn't know that like there'd be a time when I would be applying for an apprenticeship, because the nature of it was obviously it's hard to get into, blah blah blah. It was really off-putting for me, but then it's like I didn't know that just an apprenticeship that I thought would make me financially independent, I don't have to depend on no one. I didn't know that I'd achieve like so much in like I'd say a space of 1.5 years, and that just shows like a power of just like getting an apprenticeship. So yeah.
Just one thing to add to that is that it's a little thing on promotion, which is universities are a multi-billion pound business in the UK with with billions spent on marketing alone and promotion, and they promote that social life, they promote that education, they promote the futures, but there isn't as much money certainly from what I can see, that you don't hear about apprentices as much, and it's such a shame because we have those results. That's one thing that we do have. You said 24 grand. That's actually a lot more now because inflation is in the high 20s, about to break the 30s for finance apprenticeships. In IB or something like that's probably even more. We have those stats, and from my experience of Asian families, numbers do matter because you are going to talk about it to your friends, and you are going to have those nightly boasting sessions where numbers do come into play a lot. and it's a bit of a comparison. So yeah, Kasim will tell me off for speaking so much about numbers.
No, you've actually drawn on to my concluding points for today's panel, and actually, we all know schools don't do enough, and it's not about blaming the teachers. It's not about we don't want to be a blame game here, but something needs to be done. We've talked about the Baker Clause. We've talked about 6 interventions where people need to be told about apprenticeships. But actually, we've talked about the brand of apprenticeships as well. What is that brand? What is the message that we're going out? And I think what Sunny's just mentioned, are we selling the career or are we trying to sell an apprenticeship? What are we selling here? Have a think about that. I often have meetings with organisations who are like, we can't get anyone to join our apprenticeship program for surveying. Like, surveying's a massive business. When if you go out and you go to the top level of surveying, you're on 100k, more maybe. Why are you not selling that to these young people? Why are you just saying, oh, come and join us and do this town planning apprenticeship? Come and do this. What does that mean? What does town planning mean?
That's where they need to use social media, because that's where the young people are. And I get a lot of organisations reach out to me. They're like, oh, we want you to work on our website or LinkedIn. But I always respond to that okay, but what about TikTok and Instagram? Because, that's where your 16 to 25-year-olds are. In fact, my mum has TikTok. Everyone has TikTok. You know what I mean?
I don't have TikTok because I procrastinate enough as it is.
Instagram Reels, whatever. YouTube is also a really great one. And that's where I think, linking back to the point we were talking about before, where UCAS is trying a lot. They are slowly but surely coming along, and hopefully people follow. But definitely through social media is how you can get those sort of boring names become something creative, because they are creative. They just sound boring. I mean, I'm a data analyst. You hear that and you're like, ugh, you know what I mean? But actually I have a really fun job, and it includes a lot of different transferable skills that you can take away. So that's what they need to sell.
Time and time again, when I look at marketing for employers, it's not, it's not talking to anyone. It's talking to someone who already understands apprenticeships, not someone who's new to apprenticeships and doesn't understand it. What are you doing, when you look at different providers, and I'm going to talk to providers now in terms of what are you doing to make that with your smaller employers, what are you doing to support them to make sure that that young individual is feeling comfortable, as Ariba talked about, the challenges she may be facing outside of work. What support are you putting in there? What safeguarding is actually there?
Can't forget the power of apprenticeships in the upskill, reskill opportunity to support underrepresented people and people who haven't had the opportunity. I wouldn't be at Cranfield doing an £18,000 programme had I had apprenticeships not existed, and neither would most of the people on my cohort be, the future people that could be sitting around boardrooms having that opportunity, who come from the non-typical Cranfield type of cohort that there always has been. So I think that's just a really important topic.
I'd also say we just don't want to go too far with about selling the end goal, because somebody who doesn't think an apprenticeship is potentially right for them, or doesn't even understand the world of work, if you sell them the end goal right at the beginning, you put them off, because they'll be like, I won't ever achieve that. Sell it in bite-sized chunks to them. They'll understand.
Or they'll be too focused on, that end goal, rather than being, enjoying the training and the upskills and the stages of doing an apprenticeship. And that links back to the point of, why is that retention rate so low? And it's probably due to the fact that, there's better opportunities once they get to that third, fourth, whatever, first year, whatever year it is. People start offering them jobs, or, giving them access to bigger trainings. And we need to think about how, as employers, we can keep the right amount of training and make sure that our apprentices aren't getting bored, or they're not, stunting their growth, staying there. If that's due to training or salary, it all needs to be looked at.
There's another thing, which is, this is also about diversity and inclusiveness. There are some apprenticeships where, you really do have to compete for and fight for, and they are fully taken up, right? But if the awareness of that is so little that, in my cohort, I think half the places were dominated by the top 3 grammar schools in Essex. Can, going around the room, do you truly believe that there is diversity in that, or there is that awareness in that selection, which, we should have plans to target, multicultural and diverse backgrounds and, sell those facts to them.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.